Thinking. Hello and welcome to Podcast Essentials. Today we'll be talking about the gentle art of copyright, what we can and can't do. And I'm joined pretty much as usual by my good friend Mr. B over in sunny Blaney in New South Wales. You there, Rich?
I am indeed. Hello, John. Hello, listeners. Hello, viewers. Nice to be on again.
Right. Well, we'll get into it. It's fairly straightforward, copyright. If you didn't do it, don't use it. End of show. Bye. It's not quite that simple, obviously. There's a thing called...
I thought it was an early mark.
No one gets off that easy.
All right.
There's a term used in law that people quote all the time called fair usage. Now, in the blog post accompanying the presentation here on YouTube, and that'll be in the show notes, which is down there if you're watching on YouTube, I've got a flow chart in there, and there's a link at the bottom of that post to an American lawyer who talks about fair usage. Now, American copyright law isn't universal, but it's probably the area where people are most litigious. So it's the one worth having a look at. And basically he says there's no such thing as fair usage, but you can use fair usage as a defense, and there's no set rules for it. So generally you can sort of, if you're quoting something in an academic context, like you're quoting someone else's journal article, so long as you acknowledge it, you're okay. It gets a bit iffy if you're doing it on a podcast and there might be money involved, and the defense doesn't hold. Have a look at that YouTube video. It goes for about 7 or 8 minutes, and it's really instructive. But I've got like I said, I've got a flow chart on the blog post, which gives a sort of a rule of thumb, and it's got about 3 questions in it, which is all I need really to make sure that my podcasts are what they refer to in the trade as pod safe. That means they're not subject to copyright infringement. Now, there are people that borrow, in inverted commas, music from other people for their intros and outros without the proper consent, and that's fine so long as your show doesn't explode and you get 10,000 listeners an hour. Because once that happens, someone will come looking for you. So I'll just run through the flow chart, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about it. Okay, so the first question to ask yourself is, did I create the content? If I did, then yes, I can publish it, no dramas. If not, then is it Creative Commons? Now, we discussed Creative Commons in the last episode, or the one before perhaps, on multi-layered sound effects and things. Now, with Creative Commons, there's a couple of different types of Creative Commons license. One, free for all, just use it. The creator doesn't mind. They've put it out there for anyone to use. The other version is that you're free to use it, but you have to acknowledge them. So as I was saying, for the first 15, 20 episodes of World Organic News, I was using an intro and outro that was a Morse code signal that I'd found on Sound Bible, and it had been put there by the Texas Sound Library. So I had to acknowledge them at the end of every episode, just so that the creator was acknowledged and I was covered under law. Now, if it is Creative Commons, you're free to use it provided you do the acknowledgements, or you don't need to, depending on the license. If it's not Creative Commons contents, start again. If it's not Creative Commons content, then don't use it. It's that simple. Unless you've got the written legal approval of the owner. Now, the owner of copyright can get very tricky. You would think something like, say, a band that produced a song, the person who wrote the music and the words would have the rights to let you use it, but it's not always the case. Quite often the recording company maintains ownership of the content, and so you'd have to get a letter from them, in which case they'd probably want some cash.
Publishing company, John.
Publishing company, yeah. So you can go through that, but then you might have to pay a fee for every country that it's published in. So it just gets messy. If you're good with music yourself, you can create your own, in which case it goes back to the first question, did I create the content? Yes, publish. But as a general rule of thumb, if I didn't create it and it's not Creative Commons, don't use it. That's the best way to stay pod safe in the space. You got any thoughts on that, Rich?
I remember, John, that you alerted me to the YouTube licenses and how you could use the ones that were standard YouTube license and another one. Is that related to Creative Commons?
Yeah, there are two YouTube licenses. There's a Creative Commons license and the standard. The standard maintains ownership of the content by the producer. So I never, when I'm going through looking for quotes from people to insert into other podcasts, if it's not Creative Commons, I can't use it. Under law, I can't use it. I know people that do, and they'll say, "Oh, well, we'll just risk it." But I think it's an ethical thing too. You don't use other people's work. It's pretty straightforward. They've put the time and the effort into it, and if they want to maintain ownership of it and gain some advantage, like monetary, from the work they've done or publicity, then it's fair enough. I don't see the point in stealing things from other people just to make my show sound better. But a lot of them put them up as Creative Commons, and you can do that as part of your search options in advanced searches on YouTube. You can find the Creative Commons productions that they put out there. And usually you can find what you need. And if you can't, well, then you just have to talk and discuss what's going on yourself. And if you're not using their words directly, but referring to them, then I think you're okay. But again, it's just easier to create your own content. You actually learn more doing it, and it's more satisfying, would be my way of thinking. What do you think, Rich?
I agree, John. I think, what's the point of getting a whole bunch of stuff that other people have done and to create? I mean, obviously, it depends on what you're doing. If you're producing an hour-long show that you wanted various bits of music, mood music, etc., that sort of thing. I did just want to just take you back on one point, John, that when you were talking, when you do go into CC search or Creative Commons search on Google, you do get the opportunity to tick a few boxes. So if you are going to be making money out of it, I think it's the okay for commercial use has to be ticked as well. So that's just something that people should look out for. Just because it's Creative Commons, if you're making money out of it, then you might be you might not be using the right license, Creative Commons license. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Yeah, John, I totally agree with that. I think you're better off making your own content and using that way. If you do know a musician, of course, see if you can buy them a coffee or two and get them to do a theme and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, there's one particular podcast I listen to on the American Civil War, and they've been given permission to use intro and outro music by a band, but they always promote the band. So it's a mutual benefit situation, I think. If you look after each other, and if you know people, it's easier because then you can have a chat and perhaps get it in writing to be on the safe side, but then do the right thing and acknowledge the fact that this has been provided by someone else. And that point on the YouTube license, if you're going to use it for commercial purposes, that's another variation on the Creative Commons license. So you really need to dig deep and have a read before you start using other people's stuff, would be my gut feeling on it. It's not something, like I said earlier, it's unethical, it's immoral to steal other people's work, even if it's, particularly when it's work of the mind rather than work of the hands. You wouldn't go around taking someone's, front fence and putting it on your place. And it's the same deal. Someone built it, someone designed it, and now you're going to use it in your stuff. Just because it's been done with the mind and online doesn't mean it's free for everyone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, this isn't a real deep dive into copywriting. I tend to err on the safe side. Not copywriting, into copyright. I tend to err on the safe side. And if there's any question in my mind that this may or may not be available for me to use, I don't use it because I don't need the hassle. they don't need their material stolen. And no one wants to spend time in court because the only people who win then are the lawyers, as a rule. But
so, John, if sorry, I'll just interrupt you. Sorry about that. For people that are watching, for people that are listening, and again, they're just starting out in podcasting. From what you're saying, your recommendation would be, don't worry about it too much. Don't get involved with copyright. Just do it yourself. Find Creative Commons, or do it that way, and just try and keep out of copyright altogether if you can. Would that be right?
That would be my rule of thumb. The History of Rome with Mike Duncan, he didn't expect it to become overly successful. It was just something, it was a passion project. And he said, I don't know, can you hear some banging in the background there?
Just a little, yeah.
Yeah, yep. Someone's decided they're going to do some building work. Lovely. And we're in a new studio, so to speak, this week. We're in a new house. So, so we'll push on. And he used a loop from GarageBand. GarageBand provides lots of loops that are handy for people who are creating their own music, and they're Creative Commons free to use. And he got very annoyed with it. Sometime in, he thought it wasn't all that appropriate to what he was doing, but because he'd started with it, he finished with it 178 odd episodes later. So that's the other thing, is to think carefully about what you're doing to start with. And it doesn't hurt to change anyway halfway through, or however many years in. You can just call it a rebranding or a relaunch or something. But again, be careful. Just be careful and make sure you've got the stuff that is free to use. As I mentioned a couple of episodes ago, YouTube's got a whole slab on sound effects. And there you go. There's some more sound effects as we speak. Wonderful. They've also got a tab on music clips on the same page. So I'll dig that out and add that to the show notes. Okay. But you can, and they vary from sort of 5 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes, a bit like this bloke outside. That's the trouble, of course, with moving back into suburbia, or urban, actually. We're in an urban setting. So, and it's not a particularly soundproof dwelling. And we've only been here since yesterday, so I haven't had time to faff about de-proofing the place. But he's going to keep going by the sounds of things, so we might wrap this one up. I think the key points are, if it's not yours, don't use it. If it isn't yours and you're allowed to use it, make sure you're using it in the correct way. And if you're going to use commercially produced material, make sure you have all the permissions. And permissions can take forever to come through, and just say no matter how wonderful you is prepared for that. And if the likelihood is that you will get a no, just produce your own or use Creative Commons. Is, I think, the easiest way to do it. Do you think, Rich?
Yeah. Also, if you do know a young band that needs a bit of exposure and you like their music, by all means approach them, as long as they do own their music. It's not owned by the publishing company, and say, offer to pay them. It's a great opportunity for them, and hopefully, if your podcast does get quite a few listeners, they get credit, they get payment, and everybody's happy, and you're supporting local music. So just bear that in mind. That's something I thought would be useful for people looking for a unique theme, perhaps, rather than something that's just been generated before many, many times.
Yeah. Well, that's the nature of podcasting, is to be collaborative and to reach out to people. There's nothing very competitive about the sector, I find. And everyone's got their own take on each particular niche, which is why you'll either listen to 7 or 8 different programs on the same topic. And on that point, our next episode is on defining your audience, who it is you're actually talking to or want to talk to, and who you're going to focus your material on. And having, they call them avatars now, but having a what's the word I'm after? An iconic listener in your mind to talk to can be easier when you're starting, so that you can pitch your tone to what you think that particular segment of the the world would like to hear.
Looking forward to that one.
Yeah. And on that
Something I'm
happy,
going to think of at the moment. Yeah.
yeah. And with that, I think we'll call this to an end because now the truck's just pulled up. So it's just the joys of live podcast, live.
You've soldiered through, John, very, very manfully. Well done.
I can't wait to fiddle with this in post-production. But anyway, there might be some voiceovers or whatever. All right, well, we'll call this one to an end, and we'll see you all on Tuesday for Your Audience Defined. Thanks for listening, and we'll pull it to an end.
Thanks, John.